Welcome back to another absolutely insane Manhwa Recap, and today we're diving into a story that's going to completely blow your mind. Picture this. You're just some regular guy living your boring life, scrolling through your phone like a zombie, when suddenly the world decides to throw the ultimate curveball at you. We're talking about a protagonist who gets transported to another world for what feels like forever, grinds his way to godlike status, and then comes back to Earth only to discover that everyone else might as well be tutorial level NPCs compared to him. This is the kind of story that makes you question everything you know about power scaling and what it really means to be overpowered. Our main character didn't just spend a weekend camping in the wilderness. No, this guy survived for an entire millennium in a hostile alien world, filled with monsters that would make your worst nightmares look like cute puppies. And when I say survived, I mean he didn't just hide in a cave eating berries. This man became the apex predator, the king of beasts, the absolute ruler of a world where only the strongest survive. But here's where it gets really interesting. After grinding for literally 1,000 years in what was essentially the ultimate hardcore survival mode, our protagonist returns to modern-day Korea only to find out that barely any time has passed at all. It's like he spent centuries maxing out his character while everyone else was still stuck at level 1, completely oblivious to the fact that portals and monsters were about to become their new reality. The story kicks off with our completely ordinary protagonist living the most mundane life you can imagine in Korea. He's walking around, minding his own business, probably thinking about what to have for dinner, when suddenly the sky starts exploding with these massive yellow lightning bolts that are basically death incarnate. These aren't your regular thunderstorm lightning strikes. We're talking about energy blasts that can vaporize cars and send them flying like paper airplanes. Hmm. Everyone's running for their lives, pure chaos everywhere, and our guy is just one of thousands of people desperately trying to survive this apocalyptic nightmare. But fate has other plans for him. Just when it looks like he's about to become Truck Hun's next victim, something absolutely wild happens. A portal opens up and sucks him right through, transporting him to a completely different world in the blink of an eye. Now, when our protagonist wakes up in this new world, he immediately knows he's not in Kansas anymore. First clue, there are two freaking moons in the sky. Second clue, the birds look like they escaped from some cosmic horror movie. Third clue, he's completely naked and surrounded by monsters that want to turn him into their next meal. Talk about a rough first day in a new world. This place isn't just dangerous, it's designed to kill anything that doesn't belong there. Our protagonist quickly realizes that this is a world where the law of the jungle isn't just a saying, it's literally the only law that matters. You either become strong enough to survive or you become something else's dinner. There's no middle ground, no safe zones, no tutorial to ease you into the experience. The early days are absolutely brutal. Our guy is running for his life constantly, barely managing to stay one step ahead of the various predators that want to end his existence. He's eating random fruits he finds, hoping they won't poison him, hiding in caves, and basically living like a caveman who's been dropped into the most hostile environment imaginable. But here's what makes this story so compelling. Our protagonist doesn't just survive, he adapts. Slowly but surely, he starts to understand the rules of this world. He begins to notice that kind of system there's some at work, giving him stats and abilities as he overcomes challenges and defeats enemies. It's like he's trapped in the world's most hardcore RPG, except there's no respawn button, and death means game over permanently. The real turning point comes when he encounters a pack of wolves. Instead of becoming their lunch, something unexpected happens. He ends up saving one of their cubs, and suddenly he's not just fighting for survival anymore, he's building relationships. These wolves become his first real family in this alien world, and they accept him as one of their own. Over the years, our protagonist transforms from a helpless human who couldn't even find proper shelter into something that's barely recognizable as the person he used to be. He's not just surviving anymore, he's thriving. He's learned to hunt, to fight, to lead, and most importantly, he's learned what it means to be truly strong in a world where weakness equals death. The timescale of this transformation is what makes it so incredible. We're not talking about a few months of training montages. This is literally centuries of constant growth, constant challenge, constant evolution. Our protagonist spends decades mastering different aspects of survival, combat, and leadership. He goes from being prey to being predator, from being hunted to being the hunter. By the time several hundred years have passed, our protagonist has become something that the original him couldn't even imagine. He's the king of his territory, commanding respect from creatures that could tear apart armies. He's fought battles that would make legendary warriors weep, faced challenges that would break the minds of ordinary people, and survived in conditions that would be considered impossible by any reasonable standard. But the most fascinating part of this whole journey is how it changes him fundamentally as a person. Spending that much time in a world where only strength matters, where every day is a battle for survival, where you have to make life or death decisions constantly, it rewrites your entire understanding of what's possible and what's necessary. When our protagonist finally returns to Earth after his 1,000-year grinding session, he's not the same person who got sucked through that portal. He's carrying the accumulated experience of centuries of combat, survival, and leadership. He's developed instincts that are sharper than any blade, reflexes that are faster than lightning, and an understanding of power dynamics that goes beyond anything a normal human could comprehend. The contrast between his new reality and the world he returns to is absolutely staggering. While he was becoming the ultimate survivor in an alien death world, Earth was just getting started with its own monster problems. The people he encounters are dealing with threats that, from his perspective, are basically tutorial enemies. They're struggling with challenges that he overcame within his first few years in the other world. This creates this incredible dynamic where our protagonist is simultaneously trying to readjust to human civilization while also dealing with the fact that he's become something that transcends normal human limitations. He's like a max-level player who got transported back to the starting village watching new players struggle with slimes, while he's capable of soloing raid bosses with his bare hands. The system that governed his growth in the other world seems to have followed him back to Earth, but now it's operating in an environment that's completely different from the hostile alien landscape where he developed his abilities. This creates all sorts of interesting situations where his overwhelming power level starts to become apparent to the people around him. What makes this story particularly engaging is how it handles the culture shock of returning to civilization after spending so much time in the wild. Our protagonist isn't just dealing with remembering how to use chopsticks or figuring out what a smartphone is. He's grappling with the fundamental disconnect between someone who lived by the most primal survival instincts for centuries and a society that operates on completely different rules. Imagine trying to explain social media etiquette to someone whose idea of communication for the past 1,000 years was growling at territorial rivals or howling with his wolf pack under alien moons. The bureaucratic nightmare he faces when trying to reintegrate into Korean society is honestly hilarious in the most tragic way possible. Here's a guy who commanded respect from apex predators and ruled over vast territories through sheer strength and cunning. And now he has to fill out forms to prove he's awakened. The awakened central office treats him like he's some kind of confused trauma victim because his power readings don't make sense according to their limited understanding of how abilities work. What's absolutely mind-blowing is how the classification system completely fails to capture what he's become. They slap an F rank label on him because their machines can't properly measure someone who transcended normal power, scaling through a millennium of constant evolution. It's like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon. The tools simply aren't designed for something of that magnitude. The irony is thick when you see him interacting with other awakened individuals who think they're hot stuff because they can handle level 1 dungeons or have some basic elemental abilities. These people are proud of accomplishments that our protagonist was surpassing in his first decade in the other world. They're celebrating clearing dungeons that would have been considered warm-up exercises during his early training days with the Wolfpack. His younger brother Junho becomes this fascinating mirror for showing just how far our protagonist has evolved beyond normal human limitations. While Junho is struggling with basic survival instincts and gets overwhelmed by the violence required to awaken his abilities, our protagonist watches with the patience of someone who spent centuries perfecting the art of controlled violence. The scene where he helps Junho awaken by forcing him to confront goblins isn't cruel. It's educational from the perspective of someone who understands that strength can only be forged through genuine adversity. The guild system and mercenary rankings that everyone else takes so seriously become almost comically irrelevant when you're dealing with someone who spent centuries establishing and maintaining his own kingdom in a hostile dimension. These people are arguing about guild hierarchies and political positioning, while our protagonist is thinking in terms of territorial dominance and resource control on a scale they can't even comprehend. What makes his interactions with Choi particularly interesting is how she represents the absolute pinnacle of what Earth's awakened system has produced. Yet she instinctively recognizes that he operates on a completely different level. Her detection abilities, which are supposed to be the best available, keep giving her conflicting readings because they're trying to categorize something that exists outside their framework entirely. The dungeon diving scenes really showcase the absurd power gap between our protagonist and literally everyone else. While other teams are carefully strategizing and coordinating to handle basic monster encounters, he's casually soloing creatures that should require entire squads of experienced awakened. His approach to dungeon clearing isn't tactical, it's ecological. He understands these environments because he lived in similar conditions for centuries, reading monster behavior patterns and territorial dynamics like other people read street signs. The Level 4 dungeon incident becomes this perfect demonstration of how his millennium of experience translates into modern dungeon diving. What everyone else sees as a life-threatening crisis requiring military intervention and emergency protocols, he approaches with the casual confidence of someone who faced similar challenges daily for hundreds of years. The orcs and monsters that terrify seasoned B-rank hunters are essentially familiar wildlife to him. His beast transformation abilities reveal just how fundamentally he's changed during his time away. This isn't some awakened power that manifested according to Earth's system. This is the result of spending so long integrated with pack dynamics and predator hierarchies that he's developed abilities that blur the line between human and beast. The wolf form isn't just a combat technique, it's a reflection of how deeply he internalized the survival strategies that kept him alive for a millennium. The most fascinating aspect is watching him navigate the social and political landscape with the same strategic mindset he used to dominate territorial conflicts in the alien world. Government officials and guild representatives think they're negotiating with someone who needs their approval and support, not realizing they're dealing with someone who could reshape the entire power structure if he decided their arrangements weren't beneficial. The contract negotiations and territorial assignments they offer him are hilarious when you consider his perspective. They're essentially trying to give him permission to do things he's been doing on a massive scale for centuries. It's like offering to teach swimming to someone who spent 1,000 years as an apex ocean predator. His relationship with Han the streamer adds this modern twist that highlights how disconnected he is from contemporary culture while simultaneously showing his adaptability. Han represents everything our protagonist missed about human civilization: technology, entertainment, social media, modern communication. Yet their partnership works because Han recognizes genuine strength and loyalty when he sees it, even if he doesn't fully understand its scope. The YouTube streaming element becomes this weird bridge between his ancient predator instincts and modern society's obsession with content and entertainment. Watching him become inadvertently famous for demonstrating abilities that are second nature to him after centuries of practice creates this strange dynamic where he's simultaneously the most powerful person on the planet and completely clueless about hashtags and subscriber counts. When foreign governments and intelligence agencies start taking interest in him, it creates this geopolitical tension that he approaches with the same territorial awareness he used to manage interspecies conflicts in the alien world. These people think they're playing sophisticated political games, but from his perspective, they're just competing predators testing boundaries and trying to establish dominance hierarchies. The monk Miyuki Jin adds another layer to the story by representing someone with genuine spiritual discipline and combat experience. Yet even he pales in comparison to someone who achieved enlightenment through centuries of life or death meditation in the most hostile environment imaginable. Their partnership works because the monk recognizes wisdom and strength that transcends normal human achievement. The dimensional energy measurement device becomes another source of absurd comedy when you realize they're trying to quantify someone whose power level was forged in conditions that their scientific instruments never anticipated. These machines were designed to measure awakened abilities that developed within Earth's relatively gentle monster emergence system, not someone who spent a millennium adapting to an environment where the baseline threat level would be considered catastrophic by Earth standards. What's particularly entertaining is watching the government officials try to categorize and control someone whose very existence breaks their understanding of how power works. They keep offering him benefits and privileges that assume he operates within their framework of limitations and dependencies. Meanwhile, he's thinking in terms of resource management and territorial control on a scale that makes their entire political structure look like children playing house. The red zone missions and necrophile outbreaks that have everyone else terrified represent exactly the kind of environmental hazards our protagonists dealt with routinely in the alien world. The infected zones that require military intervention and specialized equipment are basically Tuesday afternoon for someone who navigated similar corrupted territories for centuries. His casual approach to these supposedly apocalyptic threats reveals just how sheltered Earth's awakened community has been. The guild promotion system becomes increasingly meaningless when you're dealing with someone who established and maintained his own kingdom through personal strength and strategic alliances. While other people are grinding through guild ranks and trying to accumulate enough achievements to unlock higher level content, he's operating from the perspective of someone who already conquered the endgame content of a much more challenging system. His interactions with Miso from the returnee department create this fascinating dynamic where she's trying to apply standard protocols to someone who represents a completely unprecedented case. Her department exists to help returnees readjust to society, but their procedures were designed for people who spent maybe a few years in other dimensions, not someone who spent a millennium becoming something that transcends normal human limitations. The contract negotiations reveal how little these officials understand about what they're dealing with. They think they're offering generous terms to someone who needs their support and protection, not realizing they're negotiating with someone who could single-handedly reshape the entire awakened landscape if he decided their current system wasn't working effectively. When the level 5 dungeon incident occurs, it becomes this perfect demonstration of how his experience translates into modern crisis management. What everyone else treats as an unprecedented emergency requiring massive resource allocation and emergency protocols, he approaches with the methodical efficiency of someone who faced similar challenges as part of his daily routine for centuries. The Orc Castle dungeon showcases his tactical brilliance in ways that go beyond raw power. His ability to read territorial patterns, predict monster behavior, and exploit environmental advantages comes from centuries of practical application in similar scenarios. While Choi is struggling with trauma from previous encounters with orc lords, he's analyzing the situation with the detached professionalism of someone who fought countless territorial wars. His beast transformation abilities during the dungeon crisis reveal the depth of his integration with predator instincts. The wolf form isn't just a combat technique, it's a manifestation of psychological adaptations that allowed him to survive and thrive in an environment where thinking like prey meant death. The way he seamlessly transitions between human strategic thinking and predator combat instincts shows how completely he internalized the lessons of the alien world. The media attention and international interest he generates after the dungeon escape create this geopolitical subplot where various nations are trying to recruit someone whose capabilities they fundamentally misunderstand. These intelligence agencies and government officials think they're competing for a powerful asset, not realizing they're essentially trying to leash something that operates on a completely different scale of existence. The comparison to Lee Sung-woo, Korea's legendary SS rank irregular, becomes particularly ironic when you consider that our protagonist's achievements dwarf anything Earth's awakened system has produced. While Lee Sung-woo is feared for his ability to devastate cities, our protagonist spent centuries managing ecosystems and territorial boundaries on a planetary scale. The YouTube streaming subplot with Han continues to provide this weird cultural bridge between ancient predator wisdom and modern entertainment culture. Watching our protagonist inadvertently become a content creator while demonstrating abilities that represent the culmination of millennium-long character development creates this surreal commentary on how modern society processes and commodifies genuine achievement. His relationship with his nephew adds this touching human element that shows how his fundamental values remained intact despite centuries of evolutionary pressure. Despite becoming something that transcends normal human limitations, he still understands family bonds and protective instincts in ways that connect him to his original humanity. The territorial expansion offer from the government becomes hilarious when you realize they're essentially asking someone who ruled vast kingdoms to manage a small plot of abandoned land. From their perspective, they're offering him significant responsibility and resources. From his perspective, they're asking if he wants to babysit a tiny territory that wouldn't have qualified as a hunting ground in his previous domain. The monk's mysterious disappearance and the necrophile zones create this subplot that hints at larger conflicts brewing in the background. While everyone else is panicking about these developments as unprecedented crises, our protagonist recognizes them as the kind of territorial shifts and environmental corruptions that signal a major ecosystem changes, the kind he navigated routinely during his centuries of kingdom management. The dimensional breach detection and portal monitoring systems represent another example of Earth's awakened infrastructure, trying to process phenomena that our protagonist understood intuitively through centuries of practical experience. While they need specialized equipment and teams of experts to detect dimensional disturbances, he can sense these changes through instincts developed over millennium of living at the intersection of different realities. His casual dismissal of guild recruitment offers from major organizations reveals how little these supposedly prestigious institutions have to offer someone who built his own civilization from scratch. These guild leaders think they're offering him opportunities for growth and advancement, not understanding that he's already achieved everything their systems aspire to produce. The foreign scout attention and international recruitment attempts show how his existence is reshaping global power dynamics in ways that the participants don't fully comprehend. Various nations are trying to secure his allegiance through traditional diplomatic and economic incentives, not realizing they're competing for someone whose loyalty operates according to principles forged in a completely different context. The upcoming portal formation and the potential connection to his original world creates this anticipation that threatens to destabilize everything he's built on Earth. The government officials who think they've successfully negotiated his cooperation don't understand that his primary motivation has always been reuniting with the Pack family that shaped his development over centuries of shared survival. The technical difficulties with system integration and ability classification continue to highlight how Earth's awakened infrastructure simply wasn't designed to handle someone who developed outside their framework. His stats and abilities break their measurement systems not because of some technical malfunction, but because he represents evolutionary development that transcends their understanding of what's possible. The brewing storm becomes even more intense when we start seeing the larger implications of our protagonist's return. The hero character, this legendary figure who's been dominating the global awakened scene, represents everything Earth considers the pinnacle of human evolution. This guy has been regression looping through the same timeline for centuries, accumulating knowledge and power through repeated attempts at preventing some apocalyptic future. But here's the kicker. In all his hundreds of regression cycles, Park Suho never appeared on his radar as someone significant. This creates this absolutely mind-bending paradox where someone who's supposed to know every major player and event in the awakened world encounters a complete anomaly. Hero's confusion isn't just surprise. It's the existential crisis of someone whose entire strategic framework is built on perfect information suddenly discovering a variable that shouldn't exist according to its accumulated centuries of timeline knowledge. The regression dynamic adds this meta layer to the power scaling that's absolutely brilliant. While Hero has been optimizing his approach through temporal manipulation and foreknowledge, our protagonist achieved his transcendence through the most honest possible method, grinding through genuine adversity for a subjective millennium without any shortcuts or do-overs. It's the difference between someone who studied for a test by seeing all the questions in advance versus someone who actually mastered the underlying subject through pure dedication. What makes this even more fascinating is how Hero's regression abilities, which should theoretically make him the most prepared person on the planet, become almost irrelevant when dealing with someone whose very existence represents an unprecedented development. All those carefully laid plans and optimized strategies assume a world where the power ceiling is defined by Earth's awakened system, not someone who evolved beyond those limitations in an entirely different context. The tournament scenes showcasing Hero's dominance over other S-rank fighters become this perfect backdrop for highlighting just how isolated both of these transcendent figures are from normal human achievement. While Hero casually dismantles opponents who represent the absolute peak of what Earth's system can produce, our protagonist is dealing with bureaucratic paperwork and trying to remember how chopsticks work. The contrast between their approaches to overwhelming superiority is striking. Hero embraces his role as the ultimate weapon, while our protagonist just wants to find his missing monk friend and figure out why his phone keeps making notification sounds. The international intelligence community's attempts to analyze and recruit our protagonist become increasingly desperate as they realize their standard assessment methods are completely inadequate. These agencies have detailed profiles on every significant awakened individual globally, but they're trying to categorize someone whose development occurred entirely outside their monitoring systems. It's like marine biologists trying to classify a creature that evolved in deep space. Their expertise is simultaneously relevant and completely insufficient. The CIA operatives watching him feed pigeons at Seoul Station perfectly encapsulates this intelligence failure. They're applying behavioral analysis techniques designed for normal human psychology to someone whose decision-making processes were shaped by centuries of apex predator existence. His seemingly random activities aren't the actions of someone having a mental breakdown. They're the habits of someone whose spatial awareness and territorial assessment operate on a completely different scale than urban human behavior patterns. The tragic irony of the international flight destruction by wyverns adds this ominous undertone that suggests the monster emergence situation is escalating beyond what Earth's current systems can handle. While government officials are playing political games and trying to secure powerful assets, the actual threat level is approaching something that will require exactly the kind of experience our protagonist spent a millennium developing. The guild territory negotiations reveal another layer of bureaucratic absurdity when they offer him abandoned industrial areas as if they're presenting valuable real estate opportunities. From their perspective, they're providing him with significant resources and development potential. From his perspective, they're asking if he wants to claim a small patch of already cleared territory that wouldn't have qualified as a decent hunting ground in his previous domain. The speed with which he transforms their offered wasteland into a thriving forest ecosystem demonstrates capabilities that operate on a completely different scale than anything their urban planning departments ever considered possible. The tree spirit manifestations during his territory marking showcase abilities that blur the line between individual power and environmental manipulation. While other awakened individuals have combat abilities or elemental control, he's demonstrating the kind of large-scale ecosystem management that suggests his development included learning to work with planetary-level natural systems. The government officials who think they're witnessing some kind of impressive landscaping display don't understand they're watching someone terraform reality according to principles he learned through centuries of territorial administration. Miso's attempts to manage the political fallout from his increasing visibility show how unprepared the establishment is for dealing with someone whose existence challenges their fundamental assumptions about power structures. Her department exists to contain and channel awakened individuals within existing frameworks, but she's trying to manage someone whose very presence threatens to obsolete their entire approach to awakened affairs. The contract signing scene becomes this perfect metaphor for the disconnect between institutional thinking and transcendent capability. While Miso thinks she's securing his cooperation through carefully negotiated terms and conditions, he's agreeing to arrangements that he could unilaterally modify or abandon whenever convenient. The power dynamic they think they're establishing exists only in their imagination. The real relationship is more like a cosmic entity agreeing to follow traffic laws out of politeness rather than necessity. The Choi deployment to the necrophile zones adds this subplot that highlights how Earth navigated routinely in the alien world. These that represent exactly the kind of environmental hazards our protagonist's military infrastructure is struggling with threats-infected areas that require specialized equipment, and military intervention are basically Tuesday afternoon for someone who spent centuries dealing with corrupted territories and hostile ecosystems. Her communication breakdown and presumed death in the red zone creates this emotional catalyst that finally motivates our protagonist to take direct action beyond his usual passive cooperation. The shift from someone who was patiently working within Earth's systems to someone who's actively intervening represents a fundamental change in how he's approaching his reintegration with human civilization. The search and rescue implications become particularly interesting when you consider how his tracking abilities, developed through centuries of navigating hostile alien terrain, would translate to modern combat zones. While military units need satellite support and coordinated intelligence to operate in these infected areas, he can read environmental conditions and threat patterns through instincts that were literally forged in more challenging circumstances. The dimensional measurement device rental situation continues this theme of Earth's awakened infrastructure, trying to monetize and control capabilities they don't understand. They're treating him like a client who needs to lease equipment to operate effectively, not realizing they're essentially trying to charge Superman for access to a bicycle. The 3 billion won cost they're so proud of negotiating represents pocket change to someone whose guild account accumulated more wealth in 3 days than most organizations see in years. The monk's disappearance from the orphanage adds this personal mystery that connects to larger patterns of instability in the awakened world. While everyone else treats missing persons cases as isolated incidents, requiring standard investigative procedures, our protagonist recognizes these disappearances as part of larger territorial shifts that signal ecosystem-level changes in the monster emergence patterns. The Han streaming subplot continues to provide this fascinating commentary on how modern society processes and commodifies genuine achievement. Their guild's dungeon clearing videos rack up millions of views, not because the audience understands the technical mastery being demonstrated, but because they recognize something extraordinary, even if they can't articulate what makes it special. It's like watching people try to appreciate classical music when they've only ever heard pop songs. They know it's impressive, but they lack the context to understand why. The government's increasing desperation to maintain some level of oversight and control becomes more apparent as they realize how little influence they actually have over someone whose cooperation is entirely voluntary. Their attempts to provide him with benefits and privileges assume he operates within a framework where their approval matters. But he's demonstrated repeatedly that he could reshape their entire system if he decided their current arrangements weren't working effectively. The upcoming portal formation creates this anticipation that threatens to completely destabilize the careful political balance everyone's trying to maintain. If the portal really does connect to the world where he spent his millennium of development, it could introduce variables that make all current power calculations irrelevant. The government officials who think they've successfully negotiated his temporary cooperation don't understand that his primary loyalty has always been to the pack family that shaped his evolution over centuries of shared survival. The international attention from Russia's KGB, Israel's intelligence services, and Tokyo's Awakened Federation represents this global recognition that something unprecedented is happening in Korea. These agencies, which normally compete through established diplomatic and intelligence channels, are all converging on the same target because they recognize that traditional power balances might be about to shift dramatically. The comparison to Lee Sung-woo becomes even more pointed when you consider that Seoul's legendary Irregular, despite his city-devastating capabilities, still operates within Earth's awakened framework. His achievements, while impressive by local standards, represent optimization within known parameters rather than transcendence beyond the system itself. The possibility of dealing with a second Lee Seung-woo that officials keep worrying about misses the point entirely. They're not looking at an improved version of something familiar. They're encountering something that operates according to completely different principles. The medical examination results and dimensional energy readings that keep producing conflicting data represent another manifestation of Earth's scientific infrastructure failing to process something that developed outside their measurement parameters. These instruments were calibrated based on awakened individuals whose abilities manifested within Earth's relatively controlled monster emergence environment, not someone whose power development occurred in conditions that would be considered apocalyptic by Earth standards. The family dynamics with Junho and his son add this humanizing element that shows how his fundamental values remained intact despite centuries of evolutionary pressure. His protective instincts toward his nephew and desire to reconnect with his brother demonstrate that his core humanity survived the transformation, even as his capabilities transcended normal human limitations. The simple pleasure he takes in buying his brother a new car reveals someone who still understands basic human happiness and family bonds, despite having ruled kingdoms and commanded apex predators. The awakening process he guides Junho through showcases his understanding of how strength develops through genuine adversity. While Earth's awakened individuals often manifest abilities through traumatic monster encounters, his approach to helping his brother awaken demonstrates centuries of experience in managing the psychological transition from prey mentality to predator consciousness. The controlled exposure to violence he provides isn't cruelty, it's educational methodology developed through understanding how genuine strength can only be forged through authentic challenge. The debt collection scene where he effortlessly dismantles an entire criminal organization highlights the absurd power gap between his capabilities and Earth's conventional threats. These loan sharks, who probably consider themselves dangerous because they can intimidate ordinary civilians, encounter someone whose casual physical presence carries the accumulated weight of centuries spent as an apex predator. The psychological impact of his mere existence on these small-time criminals demonstrates how completely his development transcends anything Earth's criminal underworld could prepare for. The guild formation process and the bureaucratic requirements for establishing official awakened organizations become another source of administrative comedy when applied to someone whose organizational experience includes building and maintaining civilizations. While other prospective guild leaders are struggling with member recruitment and resource allocation, he's thinking in terms of territorial control and ecosystem management on scales that make their entire framework look like children playing business simulator games. The streaming revenue and international donations pouring into Han's channel create this weird economic subplot where their guild accidentally becomes financially successful through content that showcases abilities developed over centuries of life or death training. The foreign scouts and government agencies trying to buy influence through super chat donations represent this bizarre intersection between ancient predator wisdom and modern attention economy mechanics. The territorial expansion into the haunted house location provides this perfect metaphor for how his presence transforms environments according to principles that operate beyond normal human understanding. While his guild members are worried about internet installation and renovation contractors, he's assessing the space in terms of defensive positions, resource availability, and territorial advantages that reflect strategic thinking developed through centuries of kingdom management. The tree growth acceleration and forest manifestation during territory marking demonstrate capabilities that suggest his development included learning to work with natural systems on a planetary scale. What everyone else sees as impressive landscaping represents the application of ecological understanding that was literally vital for survival in an alien environment where territorial control meant managing entire ecosystems. The forest creation isn't just some flashy awakened ability. It's the practical application of territorial management skills that were literally life or death necessities in the alien world. While his guild members are marveling at the speed of the tree growth, he's establishing defensive perimeters, resource production zones, and strategic positions based on territorial control principles that were refined over centuries of actual kingdom administration. The government's reaction to his instant forest manifestation reveals how completely unprepared they are for someone whose capabilities operate on geological timescales. Miso and her team think they're witnessing some kind of advanced plant manipulation ability, but they're actually watching someone terraform reality according to ecosystem management principles that were developed through centuries of planetary-scale environmental control. The wolves that begin inhabiting his territory aren't just random animals attracted to a nice forest. They're responding to territorial markers and pack dynamics that he's unconsciously broadcasting based on centuries of integration with predator social structures. His ability to communicate with and command these creatures isn't some beast-taming skill from Earth's awakened system. It's the natural result of having spent a millennium as an accepted member of apex predator hierarchies. The dimensional energy readings from his territory start producing measurements that break their equipment not because of technical malfunctions, but because they're trying to quantify environmental conditions that were shaped by someone whose very presence carries the accumulated weight of centuries spent in a higher dimensional threat environment. The monitoring stations they install around his perimeter are essentially trying to measure ocean depth with a ruler. Choi's deployment to the necrophile zones represents exactly the kind of environmental hazard response that our protagonist dealt with as routine territorial management in the alien world. These infected areas that require military intervention and specialized protective equipment are basically equivalent to the corrupted territories he had to navigate and cleanse as part of maintaining his kingdom's borders. Her communication blackout and presumed death in the red zone finally triggers something in our protagonist that goes beyond his usual patient cooperation with Earth systems. The shift from someone who was casually accommodating bureaucratic procedures to someone who's actively intervening represents a fundamental change in how he's engaging with human civilization. The search patterns he employs to locate her demonstrate tracking abilities that were literally forged through centuries of navigating hostile alien terrain, where losing someone meant they were probably being digested by something with too many teeth. While military search and rescue teams need satellite coordination and specialized equipment to operate in infected zones, He can read environmental conditions and threat signatures through instincts that were developed in far more challenging circumstances. The necrophile creatures that have everyone else terrified represent exactly the kind of corrupted ecosystem inhabitants that he dealt with routinely during his territorial expansion campaigns. These infected humans that require specialized military units to contain are essentially Tuesday morning cleanup duty for someone who spent centuries managing territories where similar corruption was just another environmental hazard to account for. His casual approach to entering the red zone without any protective equipment highlights the absurd gap between his environmental tolerance and Earth's understanding of what these areas require for safe navigation. While hazmat teams and military units are treating these zones as apocalyptic hellscapes requiring extensive preparation, he's approaching them with the same level of concern he'd show for checking the mailbox. The government officials who are panicking about losing contact with both him and Choi don't understand that they're dealing with someone whose definition of dangerous situation was calibrated through centuries of facing threats that would make their worst-case scenarios look like gentle morning exercises. Their emergency protocols and crisis management procedures are designed for normal human limitations, not someone who considers level 5 dungeons to be relaxing afternoon activities. The monk Miyuki Jin's disappearance from the orphanage adds another layer to the pattern of instability that's affecting the awakened world. While everyone else treats missing persons cases as isolated incidents requiring standard investigative procedures, our protagonist recognizes these disappearances as symptoms of larger territorial shifts that indicate ecosystem-level changes in the monster emergence patterns. His investigation approach demonstrates analytical methods that were developed through centuries of tracking missing pack members across hostile alien landscapes. The clues that would require forensic specialists and detective work for normal investigators are environmental signatures that he can read as easily as others read street signs, because he spent a millennium learning to interpret territorial disturbances as survival necessities. The international intelligence community's increasing desperation to understand and potentially recruit him creates this geopolitical subplot where various nations are trying to apply traditional diplomatic and economic leverage to someone whose motivations operate according to principles they can't even comprehend. These agencies are competing for influence over someone who could reshape global power structures if he decided their current arrangements weren't working effectively. The CIA's behavioral analysis attempts become particularly absurd when you realize they're trying to predict the actions of someone whose decision-making processes were shaped by centuries of apex predator existence. Their psychological profiles and motivation assessments are based on normal human behavioral patterns, not someone whose strategic thinking was forged through managing territorial conflicts on a planetary scale. The Wyvern attacks on international flights that destroy the plane, carrying foreign agents, represent this escalation in global threat levels that's approaching exactly the kind of environmental conditions our protagonist dealt with as baseline reality in the alien world. While aviation authorities are treating dragon attacks as unprecedented catastrophes requiring emergency response protocols, he's thinking about them as fairly typical aerial predator behavior that requires standard territorial awareness techniques. Hiro's growing concern about these unprecedented developments adds this meta-narrative tension where someone who's supposed to have perfect information about future events is encountering variables that shouldn't exist according to his accumulated centuries of timeline knowledge. His regression abilities, which should theoretically make him the most prepared person on the planet, become almost irrelevant when dealing with genuine anomalies that operate outside his predictive framework. The tournament demonstration where Hiro casually destroys Michael, an S-rank fighter who represents the peak of what Earth's system can produce, provides this perfect backdrop for highlighting how isolated both of these transcendent figures are from normal awakened achievement. While Hiro is optimizing his approach through temporal manipulation and accumulated knowledge, our protagonist achieved his transcendence through the most honest possible method, surviving genuine adversity for a subjective millennium without any shortcuts or do-overs. The philosophical difference between their approaches to overwhelming superiority becomes particularly striking when you compare their methods. Hiro embraces his role as the ultimate weapon and strategic coordinator for humanity's survival, while our protagonist just wants to reunite with his pack family and figure out why everyone keeps making such a big deal about things that seem perfectly normal to him. The regression timeline implications create this fascinating paradox, where Hero's centuries of optimization assume a world where the power ceiling is defined by Earth's awakened system, not someone who transcended those limitations in an entirely different developmental context. All those carefully laid plans and strategic preparations become potentially obsolete when confronted with variables that represent genuine evolution rather than optimization within known parameters. The upcoming apocalypse that Hero is preparing for through repeated timeline manipulation might actually require exactly the kind of experience that our protagonist developed through his millennium of survival in conditions that would be considered apocalyptic by Earth standards. The irony is that while Hero has been trying to prevent humanity's destruction through strategic planning and power accumulation, our protagonist accidentally became exactly what humanity might need through purely organic development. The portal formation detection systems that have everyone on high alert represent another example of Earth's awakened infrastructure trying to process phenomena that our protagonist understood intuitively through centuries of living at intersections between dimensional realities. While they need specialized equipment and expert analysis to detect dimensional disturbances, he can sense these changes through instincts that were literally forged in environments where dimensional stability was a daily survival concern. The government's increasing anxiety about the potential portal connection to his original world reveals how little they understand about what they might be dealing with if that gateway actually opens. They're treating it as a diplomatic and strategic challenge, but if it really does connect to the environment where he spent his millennium of development, it could introduce threat levels that make their current crisis management protocols look like children's safety drills. The military preparations and defensive positioning around the potential portal site demonstrate Earth's approach to unknown threats through conventional force projection and technological solutions. Meanwhile, our protagonist is thinking about it in terms of territorial negotiations and ecosystem management, with entities that might not even recognize human civilization as something worth acknowledging rather than simply displacing. The international scout recruitment attempts become increasingly desperate as various intelligence agencies realize their standard assessment methods are completely inadequate for evaluating someone whose development occurred entirely outside their monitoring systems. These recruiters are offering incentives and opportunities that assume he operates within their framework of limitations and dependencies, not understanding that he's essentially a force of nature that happens to be shaped like a person. The YouTube streaming revenue and global attention that Han's channel generates creates this weird economic dynamic, where their guild accidentally becomes one of the most financially successful awakened organizations through content that showcases abilities developed over centuries of life or death training. The super chat donations from foreign governments and intelligence agencies represent this bizarre intersection between ancient survival wisdom and modern attention economy mechanics. The subscriber growth and viral video metrics become this strange measure of achievement that has absolutely no correlation with actual capability or significance. While millions of people are watching their dungeon clearing videos and marveling at the efficiency, they're essentially observing someone demonstrate skills that were refined through centuries of similar activities in far more challenging environments. The comment sections and fan theories about their guild's abilities showcase how completely the general public misunderstands what they're actually witnessing. These viewers think they're watching some kind of optimized, awakened team with great coordination and strategy, not realizing they're observing someone whose individual capabilities transcend their entire conceptual framework for what human achievement looks like. The guild promotion requirements and bureaucratic advancement systems become increasingly meaningless when applied to someone whose organizational experience includes building and maintaining civilizations through personal strength and strategic alliances. While other guild leaders are grinding through achievement requirements and trying to accumulate enough credentials for higher level access, he's operating from the perspective of someone who already conquered endgame content in a much more challenging system. The level 5 guild status they offer him as some kind of significant reward represents access to dungeons and territories that wouldn't have qualified as training grounds during his early development phases. The excitement they expect him to show about being able to tackle level 5 challenges is like offering a doctorate program to someone who's already spent centuries as a tenured professor at the universe's most demanding educational institution. The territorial expansion proposal into the northern regions reveals another layer of bureaucratic absurdity when they present abandoned wasteland as if it's valuable real estate with development potential. From their perspective, they're providing him with significant resources and administrative responsibility. From his perspective, they're asking if he wants to claim territory that's already been cleared of interesting challenges and turned into the equivalent of a suburban subdivision. The modular housing and infrastructure support they offer for managing refugee populations assumes he needs their technological solutions and logistical support to handle large-scale population management. Meanwhile, he's thinking about it in terms of establishing sustainable communities based on principles of resource distribution and territorial organization that he developed through centuries of managing diverse populations across challenging environments. The North Korean situation and refugee crisis predictions represent exactly the kind of geopolitical instability that he managed routinely during his territorial expansion campaigns. While government officials are treating potential mass migration as an unprecedented challenge requiring careful planning and resource allocation, he's approached similar population displacement scenarios as standard administrative responsibilities during his kingdom management phases. Thus, the infected zone expansion and necrophile outbreak patterns that have everyone panicking represent environmental corruption dynamics that he dealt with as routine territorial maintenance in the alien world. These spreading contamination zones that require military containment and specialized response teams are essentially equivalent to the corrupted territories he had to cleanse and manage as part of maintaining his kingdom's ecological stability. The virus theories and alien contamination speculation completely miss the point about what these infections actually represent. While scientists are trying to understand necrophile transformation through biological and medical frameworks, he recognizes the symptoms as territorial corruption patterns that indicate ecosystem-level instability requiring environmental management rather than medical treatment. The dimensional industry implications and economic disruption scenarios that have policymakers worried represent changes in resource availability and territorial control that he navigated routinely during his centuries of kingdom administration. While economists are trying to model the impact of portal-based commerce and monster resource harvesting, he's thinking about it in terms of trade route establishment and resource extraction optimization based on centuries of practical experience. The foreign recruitment offers and international competition for his allegiance continue to escalate as various nations realize traditional diplomatic and economic incentives are completely inadequate for securing the cooperation of someone whose loyalty operates according to principles forged in entirely different contexts. These governments are essentially trying to buy the allegiance of someone whose concept of valuable resources and meaningful relationships was shaped by centuries of apex predator social dynamics. The contract negotiations and benefit packages they keep proposing assume he operates within frameworks where their approval and support matter, but he's demonstrated repeatedly that he could reshape their entire international system if he decided their current arrangements weren't working effectively. The power dynamic they think they're establishing exists only in their imagination. The real relationship is more like various ant colonies competing to secure favorable treatment from a passing giant who's being polite enough to watch where he steps. The portal detection equipment starts going absolutely haywire as dimensional energy readings spike beyond anything their instruments were designed to measure, while government technicians are frantically trying to recalibrate their devices and figure out why all their readings are showing impossible values. Our protagonist casually mentions that the energy signature feels familiar but different, like recognizing your childhood neighborhood after it's been completely renovated by aliens who have very different ideas about urban planning. The military convoy positioning around the potential portal site creates this almost comical scene where heavily armed units are preparing for what they consider an unprecedented dimensional incursion, while our guy is basically treating it like checking whether his old apartment building is still standing after a decade away. The soldiers are running threat assessments and establishing defensive perimeters based on their understanding of portal emergence protocols, completely unaware that they're essentially setting up a lemonade stand outside the gates of Valhalla. Troy's detection abilities, which represent the absolute pinnacle of Earth's dimensional sensing technology, keep giving her conflicting readings that don't match any known portal classification system. She's trying to categorize what they're witnessing using frameworks designed for Earth's relatively controlled dimensional emergence patterns, not realizing she's attempting to measure something that operates according to principles developed in an environment where dimensional instability was just Tuesday weather. The revelation that this isn't actually the portal to his original world creates this fascinating moment where our protagonist demonstrates the kind of intuitive dimensional awareness that comes from spending centuries navigating between realities. While everyone else needs specialized equipment and expert analysis to determine portal destinations and threat levels, he can distinguish between different dimensional signatures the way other people can tell the difference between coffee and tea by smell. His casual dismissal of what everyone else considers a major dimensional event highlights just how routine interdimensional travel became during his millennium of existence in a reality where portal formation and dimensional shifts were environmental hazards rather than unprecedented phenomena. The excitement and terror that has government officials mobilizing emergency response teams is basically equivalent to him noticing it might rain later. The Level 4 dungeon classification that finally gets assigned to the new portal creates another layer of administrative comedy when you realize they're treating it as a significant challenge, requiring careful planning and resource allocation. From their perspective, a Level 4 dungeon represents serious business that demands respect and preparation. From his perspective, it's barely worth mentioning, like someone getting excited about having to parallel park. The measurement device rental negotiation reaches peak absurdity when they present him with a 3 billion won equipment lease, as if they're offering him access to cutting-edge technology that will revolutionize his dungeon clearing capabilities. Meanwhile, he's thinking about it the way you might consider whether to use a calculator for arithmetic you could do in your head. Technically helpful, but not exactly necessary for someone who spent centuries developing more sophisticated analytical methods. The combat team deployment request gets rejected with the kind of polite firmness that comes from someone who's managed actual armies and understands that adding more people to a situation doesn't automatically make it better. While military commanders are thinking in terms of tactical support and coordinated assault strategies, he's approaching it from the perspective of someone who's learned that sometimes the most efficient solution is to handle things personally rather than trying to coordinate group activities. The recording equipment and documentation requirements they keep insisting on represent this bureaucratic obsession with quantifying and analyzing everything through official channels. They want detailed reports and video evidence of his capabilities, not understanding that they're essentially asking Mozart to provide sheet music notation for every breath he takes while playing piano. His brother Junho's awakening process and the butcher designation he receives showcases how Earth's system tries to categorize abilities that developed through genuine survival necessity rather than the more controlled awakening scenarios most people experience. The bloodthirsty efficiency that emerges when Junho finally embraces his awakened abilities represents exactly the kind of psychological transformation that our protagonist went through during his early adaptation phases, just compressed into a much shorter time frame. The dimensional energy measurement results that show our protagonist's power level, jumping from 96 to 189 in a matter of days, completely breaks their understanding of how awakened development is supposed to work. These scientists are trying to track power progression using models based on Earth's relatively gentle awakened evolution patterns, not someone whose growth rate was calibrated through centuries of constant life or death challenges. The system errors and data synchronization conflicts that keep appearing whenever their equipment tries to process his abilities represent technological infrastructure colliding with something it was never designed to handle. It's like trying to run next-generation video games on a calculator. The hardware simply lacks the processing capacity to handle the complexity of what it's trying to analyze. The achievement shop and conquest point accumulation systems that he accesses represent gaming mechanics that operated according to rules developed in an environment where character progression needed to account for challenges that would be considered impossible by Earth standards. While other awakened individuals are excited about gaining a few stat points or unlocking basic abilities, he's working with a progression system that was designed for someone facing cosmic-level threats on a daily basis. The Beast Transformation ability unlock creates this moment where his millennium of integration with predator hierarchies finally manifests in a way that Earth's system can recognize and categorize. The wolf form isn't just some cool shape-shifting ability. It's the physical manifestation of psychological adaptations that allowed him to survive and thrive in an environment where thinking like prey meant immediate death. The tree spirit summoning and environmental manipulation abilities demonstrate capabilities that blur the line between individual awakened powers and planetary scale ecosystem management. While other awakened individuals have elemental control or combat abilities, he's accessing systems that were developed for someone who needed to manage entire biomes as part of basic territorial administration. The tracking and search abilities he demonstrates during dungeon exploration represent navigation skills that were literally vital for survival in an alien environment where getting lost meant becoming something else's dinner. The casual efficiency with which he locates targets and analyzes territorial patterns comes from centuries of practical application in conditions where mistakes had permanent consequences. The guild formation process and member recruitment challenges create this subplot where he's trying to build an organization using principles of leadership and resource management that were forged through centuries of actual kingdom administration. While other guild leaders are struggling with basic administrative challenges and member retention, he's thinking in terms of establishing sustainable hierarchies based on merit and contribution rather than bureaucratic advancement systems. Han's YouTube streaming success and the viral popularity of their dungeon clearing videos represent this weird intersection between ancient survival wisdom and modern attention economy mechanics. The millions of views and subscriber growth they're accumulating come from people recognizing genuine excellence, even when they lack the context to understand what makes it so extraordinary. The international donations and foreign scout recruitment attempts that pour through Han's channel create this bizarre economic dynamic, where various governments and intelligence agencies are essentially trying to buy influence through super chat contributions and social media engagement. It's like watching world powers compete for attention through emoji reactions and comment sections. The guild territory expansion into the abandoned industrial area represents another example of bureaucrats trying to provide valuable resources to someone whose concept of valuable territory was shaped by centuries of managing ecosystems across hostile alien landscapes. They're essentially offering him a small vacant lot and expecting gratitude for providing such generous development opportunities. The instant forest manifestation and ecosystem transformation he performs during territory establishment demonstrates capabilities that operate on geological timescales rather than individual human achievement levels. While his guild members are marveling at the speed of environmental change, he's applying territorial management principles that were refined through centuries of actual planetary administration. The Wolfpack integration and beast communication abilities that manifest in his new territory aren't some kind of Disney princess animal friendship powers. They're the natural result of having spent a millennium as an accepted member of apex predator social structures. The wolves that begin inhabiting his forest are responding to territorial markers and pack dynamics that he's unconsciously broadcasting based on centuries of integration with similar hierarchies. The government monitoring stations and dimensional energy readings from his territory start producing measurements that consistently break their equipment, because they're trying to quantify environmental conditions shaped by someone whose very presence carries the accumulated weight of centuries spent in higher dimensional threat environments. Their scientific instruments were calibrated for measuring normal awakened abilities, not someone who represents evolutionary development beyond their measurement parameters. Choi's deployment to the necrophile zones and her subsequent communication blackout finally triggers something in our protagonist that goes beyond his usual patient accommodation of Earth's bureaucratic procedures. The shift from someone who is casually cooperating with government systems to someone who's actively intervening represents a fundamental change in his engagement with human civilization priorities. The search and rescue operation he undertakes to locate her demonstrates tracking abilities and environmental analysis skills that were literally forged through centuries of navigating hostile alien terrain, where losing a pack member meant they were probably being processed by something with digestive systems designed for maximum suffering. While military search teams need satellite coordination and hazmat equipment to operate in infected zones, he approaches these areas with the casual confidence of someone whose definition of hazardous environment was recalibrated through exposure to conditions that would make these zones look like peaceful nature preserves. The necrophile creatures and infected zone threats that have everyone else requiring specialized military intervention represent exactly the kind of corrupted ecosystem inhabitants that he managed routinely during his territorial expansion campaigns. These zombified humans that military units treat as apocalyptic threats are essentially equivalent to the corrupted wildlife he dealt with as standard environmental maintenance during his kingdom administration phases. His casual entry into red zones without any protective equipment highlights the absurd gap between his environmental tolerance and Earth's understanding of what these contaminated areas require for safe navigation. While hazmat teams are treating infected zones as apocalyptic hellscapes requiring extensive preparation and specialized gear, he's approaching them with roughly the same level of concern he'd show for crossing a busy street. The Level 5 dungeon incident that everyone treats as an unprecedented crisis, requiring massive resource mobilization and emergency protocols, represents exactly the kind of territorial challenge that he handled as routine administrative business during his centuries of kingdom management. The orc castle that has military commanders planning coordinated assaults and evacuation procedures is basically equivalent to dealing with a particularly well-organized neighborhood association that's gotten a bit too territorial about their property boundaries. The orc war keef and tactical combat scenarios that have Choi traumatized from previous encounters represent the kind of territorial disputes he mediated routinely during his reign as Apex Predator King. While Earth's awakened community treats orc lords as legendary threats requiring specialized teams and careful strategy, he approaches them with the analytical detachment of someone who spent centuries negotiating with similar territorial rulers through a combination of diplomatic protocol and strategic violence application. And there you have it. The absolutely mind-bending story of someone who spent a literal millennium grinding through the ultimate hardcore mode, only to return and discover that everyone else is still stuck in the tutorial. This manhwa perfectly captures that fantasy we've all had of being so overwhelmingly powerful that regular problems become trivial. Except it takes that concept and cranks it up to 11. If you enjoyed this recap of pure overpowered madness, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more insane manhwa breakdowns that'll make you question your own power scaling assumptions.